Okay, so we're live.
Cool.
This week was like situations where we've employed the various sources of power in.
Okay.
So
Power
there's 7 types
dimensions.
of power, and I guess we should probably each go over situations where we've experienced them.
Definitely. I can go first. I have a
Okay.
couple. Okay, so one of my most favorites is reward power. I think a lot of us like to use that. Definitely when I have baristas that are willing to work hard for me, willing to get stuff done. Sometimes not so much so in some cases, but when they are, I like to reward them by going home early. Because definitely when we got stuff done and it's kind of slow, get to cut labor. So I feel like that's a great reward. My least favorite is the coercive power, because I always like to maintain likability. And with that, I just feel like you get a negative rapport by just giving punishments when I don't really think they're absolutely necessary at all in all instances.
Okay. I guess like an example of referent power would be, because that's like role model power, would be like what we have over our siblings. Like I feel like I have referent power over my siblings. Like they see what I do, so then they would think that's okay or that it's not okay. Another one for coercive power would be kind of like I was recently had to train my dog. So when you're training them, like crate training, if they're good, they don't have to go in it, and if they're bad, like they have to go in the crate. So it's like putting in like the bad behavior.
Right.
All
Maybe it's a
right.
use of it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry. Were you done?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Um, legitimate power. I'm a parent, so I mean, I get the legitimate power with being a dad, and so which means that I do have to use the coercive power sometimes. For punishing and making sure chores get done, etc., and making sure kids do their schoolwork, and if not, there's repercussion that comes with that, and um, expert power. In regards to work, I think expert power and the information power kind of go hand to hand, meaning that, like at work, I'm in charge of a lot of different knowledge databases regarding vendors that we use and companies that we contract with and have compliance issues, etc. So I'm like I guess the best word to describe it would be like the gatekeeper of certain information. So it comes with a little bit of power. It's not really legitimate power, but I think the information and the expert power kind of go hand to hand in some instances like that.
Yeah. I think for me, like growing up, I had a lot of. Can you guys hear me very well?
I can hear you.
Okay, on my end, it sounds super weird. All right. For me, like growing up, I had a lot of jobs where like pretty much the expert power was key, I guess. And then the actual owner, or whatever you want to call it, had horrible leadership skills, and everyone looked after the person with the expert power. And so yeah, that kind of hit close to home. And anytime I had the legitimate power approach, it was never a good work environment. And like we always did what they needed to, but it was just one of those things where you never wanted to show up for work. So I think the expert power was a good thing to have in an environment.
Okay, so then like I feel like we've gone over the first part basically. So
Yeah.
next would be like ways in which cultural differences may influence the way we interpret or interact with leaders and empower others.
Yeah, I think it's just when it does come to those cultural ideas, I think it is important to like keep that in mind. The idea that whenever you're working with somebody, you don't know where they're coming from. And like the book says, it says like Israel, Denmark, and like even New Zealand, they all share the power. And I know in a lot of situations that in a lot of places I've worked, especially at Starbucks, it's a hierarchy. There's someone that's reigning over, even though it should be like equalized. But normally they don't usually give that much thought, at least from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, like I know, just kind of from like experience, there's always been this kind of attachment to your own culture when you're hiring from within, or kind of dividing up groups with a work task. And I think that's always been a pretty negative effect as well. The people that come in the group that are liking it, usually are together. But a lot of people get left out when they're minorities or anything like that, and I think that's kind of going along with like the definition of culture we had. Like I think that was the biggest problem I had growing up. Even with the business we have now, we have a total diverse staff, and that kind of ends up negatively when a certain leader kind of chooses the people he feels most comfortable with, and it's not always the best thing.
Right.
This kind of makes me think of, I was just doing our chapter 10 response about, and I did it about cultural differences, and I'm kind of looking at how some of the comments that Trump has made about not really wanting a diverse culture. And so like what will happen if we have a leader that isn't really pro diversity? Like if we can't like have all these different opinions, like how will we respond to issues when we only have certain viewpoints on it?
Right. Well, one thing that we need to consider too is, in the workplace is, cultural. The people who come from different cultural backgrounds, their power distances that they're used to. Like in the Far East, people who there's a large power difference between the employees and then management. Not like it is here, where we can be really close to management. There's a big difference between the two. Also, there are differences between the high-tech cultures and the low-tech cultures really come into play. In the West, we pretty much say what we mean verbally. However, in the Far East, they can say one thing, but depending on how the message was delivered, it can mean something completely different. And so that's really something that we need to consider too.
Yeah. Perfect. And then let's see, the other one was fostering.
I'm trying to think of other ways, because we still have time, that cultural differences influence that. Because I feel like we've hit most of them like head on. Does anybody have any other?
Let's see. On.
I feel like when it does come into culture, it's like, I just thought about this. It's every store that I go to, there is a different culture at Starbucks. So even in intertwined businesses, there's a culture that's developed. So when you eventually go to a new job or you decide to seek employment otherwise in another place, you have to really seek out that culture. If you don't, then you come in blindfolded, your pants down, not really know what to expect.
Yeah, that's true. And I would think even no matter where you go, it would, if touching on each individual place, you could have an individualist culture versus one that's more collective. Just using your example of Starbucks, maybe one store, people are more in tune with just themselves, my schedule, my raises, etc. I just want to get my work done and go home. Versus maybe another store, people work together better and they're more collective. You work as a group, they care more about the group succeeding versus just, individual.
Yeah, it's crazy that you mentioned that.
Right, and I think that's, that depending on where you work at and the groups that you are with, that could, that goes both ways. So.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing could be age, like the cultural difference of age. Someone who's younger and under 18 might interact with a leader differently than someone who's over the age of 18 when it comes to voting or even just working, because you can work at 14, but you're not technically an adult. Like, so you don't have to interact with them like you're an adult if you don't want to, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
You have, like, I'm in the mindset of a 14-year-old, so I'm not really going to listen to a leader as much as someone who is able to vote and, like, is an adult and has to, like, take care of themselves.
Yeah. Well, even like with, like you said, when it comes to the older generation, there's this idea of like respect. It was like the hardest thing when there was a time period where I lived with my grandma, and she just demanded respect, and I was like, why? We're just two different people. And I never even thought that like the age difference. And she just kept on bringing that up, but I was like, no, that doesn't matter. But that's a real thing. A lot of elderly people think that respect is
between cultures or ages.
I think
I don't remember the term. Sorry, I don't remember the term, but it was basically saying like we have different unique characteristics between generations, and respect is kind of one that's like lost in this generation or our generation.
That's true. For sure. For me, like with the power distance, one thing that kind of I found like is interesting with that is like in my own workplace, I work at an outdoor guiding company, and so you have a lot of guys that travel the country doing the work, and then you have a lot of people that are in the office, obviously doing the day-to-day work, and both of them are even. They're not like one above the other, but the power distance when kind of we return is really interesting. Like the distance isn't so far that they, I think the guides feel worried to bring up and challenge them. But there is this power distance that has come into play that has made the work environment really interesting. And it's not so great. Like I think what was the main like bullet point was like the larger the power distance between the leaders and followers, the greater the fear. It hasn't hit that point yet, but it's a very interesting thing that I kind of was reading about how just how kind of like the hierarchy you feel when you go back there. You know, you feel like these guys are just living on the road doing nothing, and then you have these people that have a normal life, you know, in an office. So they have this the feeling of higher power. So it's kind of created a very interesting work environment. So I really love that point in the chapter.
It's interesting.
A good point. Yeah.
Then I think we've hit the time limit on this one for sure.
Awesome.
And make sure we didn't do our 25-minute video again.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, have a good day.
Awesome.
All right, you as well.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.